Welcome back for a hot summer night in. We've got a new story for you tonight that follows a young man who loves joyriding with his older cousin. That is, until they find something in one of the cars that turns the tables on them. Makes a stiff one and sit back. This is Joyride. I was 15, and I'd been joyriding with my older cousin Jay since I was 12. I remember the tension leading up to every Friday night. This was the 90s, so we'd find an old Dodge or Chrysler, something with those glowing rings around the ignition, then pop the ignition top off, just enough to stick a screwdriver in, and turn. I was always in charge of getting the door unlocked with the Slim Jim, and I got really good at it. I held it in my sleeve and slid it out as I walked up to the car window. I had the door unlocked in less than 3 seconds flat. After we had the car, there were a few spots around the city where other boosters would get together, park and drink and smoke. We'd cruise to each location before ending at the Bell Tower parking lot. It was an abandoned 5-story parking lot that people would always meet at on the top floor. It was covered, so even in the rain and snow, a crowd would usually end up there. Recently, there was a girl who'd been going named Mina. She looked like she was a few years older than me, which meant she was probably my age. I had a serious thing for her. We'd never spoken, but we'd made eyes a few times, and it always felt like something was there, or something would be there sometime soon. Jay and I made a good team, and sometimes he'd let me drive the car around. We'd meet up around 10 on the Friday, grab McDonald's, then find a car and hit the route. It was a clockwork tradition that I looked forward to every week. Then one Friday, Jay brought a new friend. The guy's name was Stav. He was from some Eastern European country and even wore the full 3-stripe tracksuit getup. I didn't trust him from the first time we went out. He had a crooked smile, made worse by several broken teeth on the upper right of his jaw. There was scarring on the tissue around it, supposedly from being pistol whipped shortly before. Everything about him made me nervous, kind of like an escaped mental patient pretending to be normal as they try to avoid detection on their way out the front door. But Jay liked him for some reason, so he became a staple in our routine. Stav was the first person I saw pop the steering column and strip and rub the wires together to get the car going. He knew his shit, and he drove like a Formula 1 driver. There were a couple times I thought we weren't going to make a turn, but he always had the e-brake on hand. I didn't like when he drove. He had a brick for a foot and wasn't swayed by consequence. The last Friday night before it all came to a screeching halt started the same as the one before it. Quick bite to eat, then out into a neighborhood we hadn't touched in a few months. We saw a 1999 Chrysler Imperial, black and without hubcaps. It was perfect. We agreed on it, and I casually approached the driver's side window with Stav. I pulled out my Slim Jim, but the car was already unlocked. Stav got in. Jay rushed over and got in the passenger side, and I took up my usual spot in the back seat. Stav peeled out, and within seconds we were on a new street, and then turning onto another. We were just about to pull out of the neighborhood when Jay told Stav to stop. There was a 1991 white Dodge Stealth parked on the opposite side of the street. Jay grabbed my Slim Jim and jumped out. He told us to meet him on the block up ahead and snuck over to the Stealth. Stav kept us going, and I watched as the Dodge's lights eventually turned on with Jay starting it up. I shifted, trying to climb up into the front seat, but felt something at my foot. There was a black duffel bag along the floor to my right. As I was about to tell Stav, a cop car passed by us on the street ahead. It slowed down as it saw us, but Stav kept forward, smoothly. Then the cop car backed up and started turning. Stav punched the gas and we took off through the neighborhood. He was ducking and winding, curving through streets, cutting corners and then down a back alley and out onto a new street leading to the Walter Street Bridge. I couldn't see the cop car or the lights, but I could hear its siren in the distance, getting further and further away. Stav dipped us to the right and we drove down under the bridge, which was quiet, empty and dark. We parked in the back corner, lights off, but Stav kept the ignition going. I was so scared. I'd heard sirens coming and going somewhere in the city and think they were all looking for us. Stav told me if the cops come down here, to get out, and we'll run up the other side of the bridge and through the woods back into town. So we sat and waited. He lit a smoke, and I remembered the duffel bag on the floor by my feet. I picked it up, pretending to come across it for the first time. Stav was interested and pulled it up to the front seat. He opened it and found several soft bricks of a black, condensed plant. A grin took over his face. He knew exactly what we had, and how pure it was. At least, that's what he said about it. We had several pounds of a new revolutionary drug that was just hitting the streets. The leaves of the plant were taken from an area near the Barringer crater in Arizona. It was home to multiple impacts from other, smaller meteors over the years. Surrounding one crater in particular, a black plant began to grow, and from that plant, leaves that gave you an indescribable high with only a minuscule amount used. Stav said it was like DMT, but real. While high on it, you actually spoke to the ancient aliens, and the more of it you smoked, the closer your connection with them grew. They could even inhabit your body. The drug was called the Devil's Teardrop because of how it looked when it fell from the sky, like a ball of black fire. Stav pulled out a small pipe and put a pinch of the drug in it. He handed it to me with a lighter. "Bottoms up," he cheered. I shook my head. Stav grabbed my hand and put the pipe in it. "It's not gonna kill ya, just try a little." He pushed the lighter on me, and before I knew it, the pipe was between my lips and was being sparked. I took a pull, but didn't inhale. I held it in and hid that from Stav. Then I blew it all out. But as I inhaled after, I got a whiff of the still lingering smoke, and my world disappeared. It was complex and wordless. Vast, impossible structures zipped past me as the car I was flying in no longer existed. I flew forward in an unwavering momentum. I passed through strange rooms, framings every several feet, as new patterns and textures and colors opened into new locations and landscapes. They gave way to a kaleidoscope of emotions and sounds and lights that warmed me like a blanket. I felt safe. The patterns began to change. Something more nightmarish replaced it, like a thunderstorm suddenly appearing. Energy clouds began to form into recognizable shapes, into bodies. They were composed of cylindrical figures that pulsed, slowly arranging into more detailed masses. The physiques were humanoid, though not physical, almost like they were wafts of a solidified smoke or mist. It reminded me of a school of fish or a murmur of birds. Multiple points of movement aligned in one succinct direction. They circled me, the pulse coming off them like a cold wave of energy. The chambers started again. We flew through them, faster and faster, going down now in an elevator instead of a roller coaster. One of the beings leaned down to me. I couldn't see its face because it was so dark, like an empty, black void. Words came from it, and I thought my chest was going to explode from the vibration. The being reached forward, grabbing my wrist. I couldn't move. The being positioned itself in front of me and pushed its face towards mine. I was trapped, locked outside the controls of my own body. My right arm shifted without my direction. Then I hit the headrest behind me. I was back in the car. Stav was sitting in front of me, laughing. I knew where I was and that whatever had just happened was over, but I kept being hit by images that all conveyed dense and constantly morphing Mandelbrot fractals and bursts of information of all kinds. I felt like I'd been gone for hours, but as I fully came to and started understanding language again, Stav informed me I'd been out for about 15 seconds. I could barely catch my breath, and Stav was already packing a full bowl for himself. I tried to tell him to wait, to sip on it, but he lit up and inhaled it like it was a soft joint. Stav fell back against the driver's side window. His eyes went dark and distant. His right hand was trembling, and his breathing went rapid. 10 seconds passed, 20, 30. He was still staring off at some invisible screen, seeing all the insanity I'd just witnessed, going through the chambers, the patterns and colors and lights, the beings. Then I heard sirens. I saw the red and blue lights reverberating down the side road along the bridge. A cop car was coming. I tried to wake up Stav, but he wasn't coming to. He'd smoked too much and was completely out of it now. He might even have overdosed. I wasn't about to get arrested with a stolen car, experimental drugs, and a dead body tonight. So I ran to the other side of the bridge and hid behind a burned-out trash can. I watched the cop car pull up to the Dodge, a flashlight and a car-mounted headlight pointed in. Stav's whole body was shaking. 2 cops got out, doing the side shimmy to the car doors as they yelled into him. Stav was still shaking. The cops radioed for an ambulance, then opened the door and pulled him out. But as they did, he opened his eyes and attacked the 2 cops. One of the cops had his Glock out and got off 5 rounds, all hitting Stav in the chest and stomach. But Stav kept going. His body kept moving. He got the other officer's gun and unloaded it into both of them. I watched both cops fall to the ground and die at Stav's feet. Stav stood there, over the bodies, looking down at them like ants. His body moved strangely, like a broken marionette, one shoulder twitching up higher than the other. It looked like something was wearing him, getting used to its new body. Stav took the car keys from one of the dead officers and climbed into the cruiser. He flicked off the cherries and peeled out. I watched Stav drive up the side road along the bridge and off into the night. I was terrified and didn't want to move, but knew I had to get that car away from those dead cops. Mine and Jay's fingerprints were all over it, Stav's too. They'd tied the murders back to us. I went back, creeping past the dead cops, and got in the Imperial. An ambulance was wailing over the bridge. It was coming to us. I restarted the car, fidgeting my Slim Jim into the ignition and turning. I pulled out to the side road up, hearing the ambulance getting closer. I managed to get clear of the bridge and turned to a side road just as the ambulance pulled off the bridge. I managed to avoid cops for a few blocks and decided on a plan to go to the LeBreton Field strip mall. That was always the first stop on our Friday tours. It was across town, but I figured Jay would wait there for us in his new Dodge Stealth. That is, if the cops hadn't nabbed him already. But as I pulled up to the strip mall, I saw something unimaginable. There were at least a dozen dead bodies, broken and smushed into the pavement. The cars that were still there had large dents and scrapes on their sides. The whole parking lot looked like a demolition truck had run through a picnic. And there, in the middle of the carnage, I saw half of a broken top siren deck from a police car. It was crushed into the mangled body of a girl in her 20s. Stav had been there, in the cop car, and he'd gone on a rampage. But I couldn't see Jay anywhere or the Dodge Stealth. Sirens continued in the distance, more joining in now. From the direction of Lakewood Park, which was usually the second stop on our route, I decided to go to the last stop, the Bell Tower parking lot, and just hope Jay was there and Stav wasn't. And maybe protect Mina in some way. I gunned it across town. Sirens were erupting from a new direction now. The third stop on our route, which was the back portion of another strip mall. Stav had just hit it. 15 minutes later, I pulled into the Bell Tower parking lot. It was quiet on the first floor, but I could hear screaming and crashing somewhere on the above floors. I whipped around the levels, driving up the ramps until I pulled onto the 5th floor. Stav's cop car was almost completely destroyed. The front end was covered in blood and gory parts. The windshield was cracked in, but there was a hole on the left side I could see Stav's face through. The parking lot had been packed, but bodies were littered across the ground. All the vehicles were smashed and cratered in, and the few remaining survivors had climbed up onto the roofs of the cars pressed into the walls. Jay and Mina were among them, along with 5 others. Stav backed the cop car up for a final ram into the cars holding the survivors, and hit the gas towards them. I did the same and T-boned the cop car, continuing forward to the end of the parking lot. Stav watched through the passenger side window as I slammed his car into the thin cement barrier, and then through it. The cop car went over the edge, with Stav still in the front seat. I managed to slam the brakes before I went over the edge with it. The cruiser fell 80 feet straight down and turned into a pancake. Below, I could hear police sirens rushing towards the lot. They'd blocked the car entrances and exits, so I got out of the Imperial and grabbed Jay and the others. This parking lot was picked exactly because it had a back stairwell down that led out a hidden exit. I guided the group down the stairwell just as the cops were flooding in. We ran down an alleyway and found our way to a subway station. From there, we all went our separate ways. I never ended up talking to Mina after that night. In fact, Jay and I stopped boosting cars altogether. We found out that all 5 stops on our normal Friday route had been hit by Stav in the stolen cop cruiser. Lots of deaths, even more injuries. The only thing I didn't know was what happened to the drugs, the devil's teardrops. The cops would have found the duffel bag in the back seat of the Imperial on the top floor of the parking lot. Who knows what they did with them from there, or who left them in the back seat of an unlocked car in the ghetto. And that concludes tonight's episode. We hope you enjoyed Joyride, and we'll see you back here next Friday night for our take on the vampire genre.